Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Evolving Consciousness. I'm your host Purushottam, and in today's video, we are going to talk about the three gateways to hell. The three gateways to hell. Now, to begin with, I would like to just highlight here that the content of today's video is going to be based on the teachings of Lord Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita. And this teaching is going to be encompass every dimension of our life, whether you belong to any school of thought of spirituality or otherwise. This is something which every human being can resonate with. So let's go deep and let's dive into the meat of the subject. Now, when I talk about the three gateways of hell, now let us understand what do I mean by hell, right? Because when I talk about hell, probably you might be thinking that there is this entire school of thought, a certain figment of imagination, which talks about this possibility of a different planetary system wherein people are tortured and people are made to suffer. Now, there is a lot of talk about this in our ancient scriptures. Now, the essence really is to understand we are not going to validate or we are not going to authenticate the truth behind that. It's a subject matter of belief. Whether you belong to the school of thought which believes that there exists a hell or otherwise. Today's video is going to sort of talk about what does hell actually mean. To put it simply, to put it analogically, hell is always shown to be a place of suffering. But what if I told you that you don't have to go to a different planetary system to experience suffering? Even in today's world, every human being at some point of his life has suffered. If there is someone who says that he has never suffered, probably the person is lying, or probably the person is enlightened. And nobody was enlightened from their very birth. Even the people who sort of reached the state of enlightenment, they also had to struggle through their initial days. Now, what does suffering mean, right? Suffering is basically something which happens in our own consciousness, right? It's more to do with our own thought processes than the outer world. Now, as difficult that might seem for some of you, this is the absolute truth. And when I talk about the three gateways to hell, which Lord Krishna talks about in Bhagavad Gita, so he basically says lust, anger, and greed. These are the three main gateways to hell. These are the three qualities through which one sort of guarantees the ticket to hell. Now, one might think or sort of try to comprehend, is this just a philosophy or does it also apply in our practical reality? Now, let us try to unravel this piece. Now, before we go into these three specific attributes, one thing which I really understood about this whole concept of belief, there is a beautiful, striking example which I would like to share with the audience, which I recently heard, which really captivated my attention. Now, this was a conversation between a foreigner and Srila Prabhupada, who is the founder Acharya of this phenomenal movement called the Krishna Consciousness Movement. He is also the founder of all the ISKCON temples. Now, this foreigner asks Prabhupada, you keep talking about Krishna, Krishna, Krishna and Krishna, right? Your entire philosophy is sort of focused on the central character of Krishna. But what if this whole world which you have built an empire upon, this whole movement upon, what if it's just a figment of imagination? What if Krishna doesn't even exist? What if all this is just hearsay? Prabhupada gives a befitting reply to the foreigner. He says that if you look at the lifestyle of people who sort of follow this philosophy, a school of thought of Krishna consciousness, these are the people who are early risers. They have a disciplined lifestyle. They spread positivity in the world. And there was a survey which was done by Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. And they did a worldwide study which sort of proved that among the top 5 happiest people in the world, in the number 1 were the people who followed the Krishna consciousness lifestyle. Now, in the 2 and 3, they were also people who followed spiritual philosophies and they were people of Buddhist inclination. But these people who sort of had a spiritual lifestyle, according to the principles of Bhagavad Gita, they were the happiest people. In the list, millionaires didn't come, billionaires didn't come, but people who were of this kind of an attitude, who had adopted this lifestyle of Krishna consciousness, they were featured as the top people who experienced this emotion called happiness. Ecstasy was natural to them. Now, Prabhupada told them, okay, fine, let's assume that Krishna doesn't exist. Let's say all that I'm saying, I'm just selling figments of imagination to people. But still, if you look at our lifestyle, we are doing so much of service. We are not just wasting our time, we are feeding people across the world. People who are orphans, people who don't have ample food to eat. We are spreading the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. We are doing a lot of proactive service to different communities. And we are living a happy life. Even though if Krishna doesn't exist, we still lived a happy and a productive life, which was filled with gems of fulfillment. But I want to ask you something, gentlemen. And Prabhupada says, what if you realize after the end of your life that Krishna does exist? Don't you think you just wasted your life hankering behind things which didn't have anything of value? Don't you think you'll feel very regretful? Because just because you thought in your own mind that Krishna didn't exist. Now, the point I'm trying to drive through this conversation between Srila Prabhupada and that foreigner is this. We always need not prove the beliefs which we hold. Not everything can be viewed through the scientific lens and apparatus. 90 to 95% of the world which we live in is not tangible. That doesn't mean that does not exist. Not everything can be measured and calibrated and filled, right? Cannot be proved to the naked eye. But that does not mean that doesn't exist. A simple example is of law of gravity. Even before Newton discovered the law of gravity did exist. But that does not mean because people were not aware of the law of gravity, that law of gravity does not exist, right? So essentially it's all a matter of perspective, it's all a matter of belief. Now coming back to our central topic. Now when I talk about these three elements, lust, anger and greed, right? So basically we need to understand how are these related. Now when I talk about lust here, it's not necessarily the sexual lust, right? It's not necessarily sexual carnal pleasure. It can be a part of it, but it's not the only thing which I'm referring to. There can be lust for fame, there can be a lust for applause, a lust for validation, a lust for respect. There can be so many different manifestations of this emotion called lust, depending on the individual, depending on the person. To put it very simply, lust is nothing but an obsessive desire for something. Anything which is in obsession, that is not something which is good for us. And if you realize this one subtle point here, if something which you want to the degree of obsession, if you don't get that, you feel anger, you feel a lot of frustration because things didn't happen the way you wanted them to happen. And anger, I don't have to make a video as to how brutal and how catastrophic anger can become to a person. Anger is like trying to catch a hot coal and trying to throw it on your enemy without realizing that the hot coal is first burning your own hand. It's as foolish as that. But we still think being angry is normal. Essentially, at the root of anger is lust. Now, lust can also be thought of in so many different ways. There's a beautiful quote by Kahlil Gibran who says, "The lust for the bodily comfort murders the passion of the soul." Now, there are so many different interpretations of this particular quote by Kahlil Gibran. Now, lust for bodily comfort, what does this mean? Most of us like to be in our complacent zones. We don't want to improve. And in the process of not improving, we are murdering the passion of our soul, which always wants expansion. Now, any person, if you ask him what he wants in his life, you will always notice that everyone wants to expand, whether in their material capacity or in their intellectual capabilities. Everyone wants to expand in life. This quality, this desire for expansion is inherent in the soul. But what we fail to acknowledge is we are not seeking these ways of expansion. We are seeking these ways of expansion in the wrong things. And when those things don't happen, we feel anger. Now, there's a beautiful aspect here that when your lust is fulfilled, is that a great thing? Essentially, it's not. When your lust is fulfilled for respect, for fame, for material success, for money, for anything, for any obsessive desire is fulfilled, that lust converts into greed. So essentially, lust, whether it's fulfilled or not fulfilled, either ways, it serves as a gateway to hell. It serves as a gateway to that internal turmoil, that internal suffering, which we all want to not experience. Nobody wants to experience hatred. Nobody wants to experience resentment. But at the root of it is this emotion called lust. I hope probably you haven't heard of this kind of a perspective before. Because the only equation we have with lust is about sexual carnal desires. Sure, that's a part of it. But that's not the only manifestation of lust. You can have lust for power. The people who indulge in so many frivolous activities because they have this lust for power. And that lust for power destroys them completely. In my last video, I gave an example of how the kings were defeated back in the ancient times. They didn't need armies to defeat lustful kings. They would employ females called Vishkanyas to sort of lure these kings into their own capacity, right? They would lure them and seduce them and enchant them, so much so that they were even ready to take poison from these people. So lust is probably the root cause of all the other impediments and all the other maladies which human consciousness is strived with. Hence, it's very important to understand this and also reflect on our own life. Now, it can also so happen that we always want validation from people. If someone looks at us and says something which is not good to our ears, we feel instantly let down. Now, this can mean so many different things. This can mean that probably you don't have a healthy self-esteem and that's why you're so hurt or so insensitive. And it can also mean that you have a lust for validation, you have a lust for appreciation. That's why you're feeling so bad. Now, to the degree to which you feel bad, to that degree you have a lust for appreciation. So, this is key, and this is the instrumental message which Lord Krishna talks about in the holy book of Bhagavad Gita. Hope my today's video brought a lot of sense and brought a lot of clarity to you as to what are the three gateways to hell and how anger and greed are essentially the evolved forms of lust. And talking about greed, right, Mahatma Gandhi put it so well. He said, there is enough for everyone's need, but not for anyone's greed. And you would have also heard of this quote which says that I tried to give my finger to this person, but he tried to catch my neck. What essentially is this meaning? When you try to be too open to people, when you try to fulfill all the needs, they start taking your advantage of you. They start taking undue advantage of you. Hence, it's very important to draw boundaries with these kind of people. And we are good judges ourselves, because we can judge a consciousness of a certain person. And probably through this kind of an intent, when we view the world, and not only the world, we can view our own selves. If you think about it, all the different aspects through which we suffer in life, all the different psychological sufferings which we sort of are bombarded with, somewhere down the line, these three qualities are the root cause of it. There probably is no secondary way. There could be secondary manifestations, a secondary parallel offshoot characteristics, but at the root you will find these three central characteristics which sort of lead to the destruction of a human being or lead to his ultimate colossal damage, right? Ultimate destruction. Hope my today's video was of value, and hope it brought about a fresh sense of awareness to view these three emotions of lust, anger and greed. Thank you so much for your time on my video, and I'll meet you in the next video.